How are you there, Nick?
Not bad, Clive.
Tell me now then, why can't you fool an aborted fetus, do you think?
I can't imagine, Clive.
Well, I'll tell you, because it wasn't born yesterday.
Excellent, Clive.
Welcome to Literary as Feck.
Brought to you as usual by myself, Nick, and the man you see on the other side of me. I don't know which side because I can't see right now, but one of the other sides of me would be
Clive.
All right.
And that joke was sent in by Mr. Michael Bowles. So thank you, Mr. Michael Bowles, for that bit of hilarity.
Levity?
Yeah.
Okay.
Keeping it light, as always.
All right, Clive. So this book that we're doing today, because
Sorry, we should mention because you live in like Middle Earth, you have a sometimes problematic internet connection, right? So every now and again, Nick might kind of disappear for a few seconds, but
yes, yeah, the Hobbit hole creates a certain amount of interference. You know, there's a certain depth that the internet has to penetrate through the earth to get down to my to my leprechaun domicile.
Show us your t-shirt there, Nick, because that's
yes.
Well, there we go.
Yes, Lucky Charms. Well, the ladies are always after me, Lucky Charms, as you well know, Clive.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I remember when we used to hang out, I used to have to beat them off.
I'm not even going to dignify that with a crass joke.
Right. So, yes. So, in keeping with the spirit of hilarity, which I'm sure we've you know.
Oh yes, the audience is
established,
stitches, no doubt.
Yeah. So get yourself back into your chairs, which you've rolled out of, and the comedy continues with a novel about the slave trade.
Yes, and can I just start by saying that when you sent this to me, and when I saw the cover,
yeah,
and I saw the writer's name, which is something Spanish sounding, Alberto Vazquez-Figueora.
Yeah.
And then the title is Ebano, a novel of the slave route. And the picture on the cover of the ebook is quite it's kind of high class. You know, it's a picture of maybe a desert scene, and it's, you know. So my immediate thought is like, oh, Matt, Clive has really, he sent me some sort of like Jorge Luis Borges or like Gabriel Garcia Marquez, serious treatment of an important topic, maybe some sort of postmodern literary. So I was like, you know, it's been a while. You know, it's been out of university for quite a while. This is probably going to be heavy going, but you know, I'm sure it's edifying. I'm sure it's important, and I'm sure I'll learn something from reading this.
Right.
And none of those things are true. So what I would like to know is, how did you even discover this writer and this book?
Right. Okay. Well, I'm trying to wonder which way we want to. Should we talk about the book first?
Okay, sure.
In a bit of background. Yeah. Okay. So, so I'll just do the basic plot beats. There's no need to belabor them, and then we can kind of jump around and talk about aspects we may or might find interesting. So, so this is a book. I guess it came out in, I think, 1975 originally in Spanish, and I'm guessing it seems to be set about then as well. It seems to be a contemporary story, and it's basically about a white guy called David, a photographer, a European photographer, who's married to a very beautiful and brilliant Olympic athlete called Nadia, who's from Cameroon, I think, right?
Right. She's Ashanti, I think, is the name of the
Yeah.
the ethnic group she's part of, right?
Yes. And of course, this novel was turned into a movie called Ashanti,
which we'll get to a bit later on because I have seen most of it now as well.
okay.
So yeah, so
Wow.
yeah, we could touch on that a bit later.
Okay, because I didn't have time, unfortunately, to get around to it. So I'm glad you did some of the work there. Yeah, and she Nadia is basically kidnapped by a Sudanese, a kind of they're slavers, a gang of slavers, led by a sadistic Sudanese guy, right?
Suleiman, I think his name is.
Yes, and a henchman, a kind of even more sadistic, pedophilic,
broadly drawn stereotype character called Amin, I think.
Yes, I think broadly drawn stereotype is a phrase we'll return to again
many times. Yes,
and I guess she's to be sold in Saudi. I got the feeling, right? She's headed for the Arab world for a sheik, and basically David wants her back, right? So he enlists the help of various characters across the Sahara to get him back, pinning his hopes especially on this kind of near mythical group called what are they called? They call the Ebony Group, right?
The Ebony Group, yeah, I think so. Yeah,
and they're supposed to be the descendants of another white group, I think.
The Ivory, maybe the Ivory Group.
That was one aspect I was slightly confused about, but basically there's they're almost like a slave retrieving version of the A-Team, you know.
Yes.
If you can find them, and if they'll help, you know that.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
Rescue the slaves.
And then there is Malik as well, who is the Tuareg kind of vengeful. You know, he's had a similar experience in his life, and he's kind of the
Right, and Tuaregs maybe an interesting lead in here. The author Alberto Vazquez-Figueora.
Oh,
yeah, bit of a glitch there.
Yeah. I think we're back there.
Yeah. He wrote a novel called Tuareg. In fact, it might even be part of a series, and that's the first Alberto Vazquez-Figueora novel I read. And I'm actually quite impressed by it.
Okay.
It has some similarities to this, but we'll get to that. But I suppose my takeaway from that novel and this one as well, to a certain extent, is despite the broadly drawn stereotypes and other kind of aspects, I'm sure we'll touch on. What I kind of appreciate about him, because I think his novels sell or sold very well in the original Spanish language. I think he has, some of his novels have been translated as well. But I think in the Spanish language world, I think he's, you know, maybe a best-selling author. I'm not entirely sure, but certainly an author that sells very, very well. So he does have a kind of easy to read style.
Yes, yeah.
But everything that I've read, I've only read about 2 or 3 of his novels, but I know a bit about his film career as well, which we'll talk about as well. But he seems to occupy a place where almost all of his main characters or the things he's interested in are a counterpoint to what you would consider the WASP Judeo-Christian mainstream view of the world, right?
Okay.
His heroes always seem to be marginal in some way.
Okay.
So he seems to be interested in dealing with kind of marginal figures, and also doing so in a non-romanticized way. Like they're not, you know, it's not the what's it called, the magic Negro trope. It's
Right.
not that. And I kind of appreciate, even though, yeah, some of his stuff, it's almost tabloid.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
But anyway, we'll get into it in more detail, because then it makes more sense, I think, if we use specific examples. But overall, I'm quite fascinated by his mix of deliberately going out of his way to shine a light on the type of characters that you might not normally read about, but he also does it in this very exploitation friendly, propulsive kind of way.
Yes. So that's what surprised me, because I think I had gone into it with the wrong impression. As I said before, I thought this was going to be something more literary and less Feck. Maybe, right? I think that there was a point at which there was a particularly bizarre scene where one of the slavers sticks a red hot chili pepper up the bum of one of the slaves, and I was like, hang on, this is trash. And it was like a little window of my mind. I was like, wait, and then my relationship to the book kind of fundamentally shifted, and I wasn't expecting some of the things that I maybe had been disappointed by up until that point. I was, and by that I mean, like, for example, any book that's about the slave trade that effectively makes its hero a white European who goes to a bunch of other white Europeans for help to bring down the slave trade in Africa seems problematic to me on a few different levels, even though the book acknowledges clearly so the group that, there's this guy Alec Collingwood, who's this kind of like British guy whose great grandfather had been a slave trader, has in order to kind of deal with his guilt or whatever it is, or the acknowledgement that his family's fortune is built on money that comes from slavery, he's become this kind of white hero in Africa, trying to stop the slave trade. There's stuff, it gets a bit Indiana Jonesy, and like a Temple of Doomy to me, the kind of the great white hero. Right. Now I agree with you that David is a weird hero because he's boring as hell.
Yeah, he is, isn't he?
Yeah. So he's not really that kind of, like, he's this photographer who's kind of set up as being very wishy-washy and not particularly strong in personality or in anything in any way. And so part of the story is about him having to kind of find his inner man.
Right. I have no idea what Nadia sees in him.
No.
At all. He must be like really good looking. Like,
yes.
Like he must have a kind of, I don't know, like a fragile beauty or something that, like,
right,
to protect it, and he doesn't need to do anything else. He just needs to look good,
Yes, which is interesting, because when it's adapted into the movie, they give Michael Caine plays the part, and they give him he's not a photographer, he's like a doctor, and he's much more like, well, he's Michael Caine, he's like so his personality is not the same as in the book. He's not that kind of I don't know what you would, milk toast kind of, so that I could see from that point of view. And as I said, some of the supporting characters like Malik is he's an interesting guy. I assume he's not the same one that Mark Harmon plays in the Enzo G. Castellari, because the book you mentioned before, Tuareg, the Desert Warrior, is an Enzo G. Castellari movie from '84 with Mark Harmon, of all people, playing
a Tuareg.
Yes.
And actually surprisingly quite good film as well. It's quite a good adaptation. Again, like this book in some ways, if someone's Mark Harmon plays a Tuareg, you're like, okay, I might not, but it's actually, that aside, it's actually quite well done.
Well, it's funny, it's one of the few Enzo G. Castellari movies I haven't seen, because I'm a big fan of his certainly his Italian cop movies and some of his action films too. So yeah, it's definitely I've already downloaded it. It's on my to get to list fairly soon.
Right. Yeah. No. It's if you read the book first, I think you'd be surprised how faithful it is.
Okay.
And just to further my point about how, even though he does it in this sort of slightly trashy tabloid European savior way, the thing about a good example of why I like what Figueora does is, so for instance, in the Tuareg book and in the film, the narrative is kicked off basically by this Tuareg character offers, I can't remember exactly because it's been a while, but basically offers another character shelter. This character's on the run from having done something, and he offers him shelter and protection under him while he's in his land, right? And then these other characters who work for, I think, the government or the law or something like that, they come along and they seize on this guy. And the Tuareg character makes it his mission then for the rest of the book or the film to make amends, regardless of any other socio-political context. The fact was, this man was under my protection and they came together, and that's all he's interested in. And it it might be a simplistic comparison, but it really helped me to understand, and bear with me here, but it kind of helped me understand why the Taliban had sheltered Osama bin Laden, almost, regardless of
to their own detriment, basically.
Yeah. And that might, I don't know if it's a valid, but it just helped me to kind of understand that mindset, and it's a mindset that is a mindset that you don't necessarily encounter, or
not in the West, but I would say, funnily
it's
enough,
not given validity. Then let's put it that way. If it is encountered, so I appreciate Figueora in that instance, and in other instances, he seems to go out of his way to at least entertain alternative thoughts and ways of being, and like I said, not necessarily whitewash them either.
Right. And yeah, I mean, that whole notion of, it's almost like chivalry. It's almost like that, if it existed in the West, it was thousands of years ago. And I think in Japan to some degree as well, that kind of that Ninkyo kind of, you see in Yakuza movies where you've got the kind of the young Yakuza who screws up really bad, and the older one is like, well, I don't agree with what you did, but I have to now go and face potential death. You know what I mean? Like it's that kind of that obligation that whereas in the West we tend to have the attitude of like, well, no, if it's going to inconvenience me, no thanks. Like, I don't want to deal with this. It's a much more self-focused kind of attitude, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, it's just funny. Like it's this weird thread where there's parts of the book that are very like worthy or attempting to be worthy, like these like very highfalutin discussions of the relationship, which is all true, like the terrible relationship between Europe and Africa and the history of slavery and so on. And then these very broadly drawn stereotypes, these kind of and these moments of these blurps of like rampant homophobia that kind of just that just kind of burst up every now and again, and they're not just presented in terms of like, okay, there's this Amin guy who's, as we said, is a kind of this pedophile, and that's something that's in the movie as well, for sure. But also just like Nadia herself, who's our otherwise fairly kind of sort of left-leaning progressive kind of young African lady, but she has no time for, like you said, this just a few comments. You're like, youch, that's okay.
She clearly has a problem with homosexuality in all forms, and it's interesting because if you're building a sympathetic character, that's not necessarily a trait you're going to give them, right? Homophobia. So it immediately leads you to think, well, is that, and I haven't read enough of his stuff to know if that is a problem Figueora has? Is that like one of his things? Or is it just a really weird choice? I couldn't quite figure out. And yes, like you said, there's a lot in it which, I mean, there's a lot of attempts at contextualizing stuff and putting it in the historical context and the history of the slave trade and the exploitation of Africa, but which is worthy. But then, like you said, a few pages later, someone's shoving a pepper up someone's asshole, and sometimes it's very clunkily done as well. Like it's
oh yes, some of those discussions are really kind of shoehorned in, or just kind of like awkwardly kind of now we're getting to the
Basil exposition,
the edifying part of the story, and then don't worry, we'll get back to the trashy and yet there are moments too that are really disturbing, like quite powerful, like the moment where one of the young, or I don't know if she's young, but one of the ladies who's taken into slavery commits suicide when they're kind of being sort of buried alive to be hidden, and then she, I think, gashes her own wrists on her. I think it's just a very upsetting piece of the story. Like it's effective and it's disturbing.
And the ending, I mean,
it's very open. It's very open.
Yeah, but it's, I mean, it's kind of dark as well, right? It's not exactly a hopeful ending, right? I mean,
well, I guess unclear to me what exactly was going on. Was he telling her to just jump out and swim back, or just jump out and drown? Like that's
drown was my.
That's your assumption. Okay, I wasn't 100% sure.
Yeah, and yes, so. It's difficult. So it's and also I mean, I did learn things, I have to say, and plus the overall concept. I mean, how many novels of a contemporary slave trade are there as well? And it's one of those things that, I don't know about you, I was immediately like, well, how much of this is accurate, or how much so I went and researched a little bit, and I mean, broadly it doesn't seem to me as if it's too far-fetched either, right? Maybe not up exactly until our I think now in our present day, I think this type of slavery is probably it's more to do with I mean, it's just as insidious the way, but it's more to do with coercion and fooling people and promising them things rather than physically dragging them through the desert. But I think there was probably still a glimmer of that at this point when this book was first written, right? So I think it is valid for all the. I mean, also, and we didn't mention this. It's a fun read in a way, right? It's not a read.
It is. No, as I said, that's what I wasn't expecting. I wasn't expecting it to be a sort of exploitative action story. I think I had thought it would be more, I don't know what, like a Toni Morrison kind of like something more weighty and maybe sad. But I don't necessarily know that that's what it is. It's definitely it's more in the men's adventure genre really than anything else,
I guess. But what I mean is as well, it's not a slog to read.
No. It's written, but it's written in that way of it's pulpy.
It is really pulpy, but it's a sort of pulpy that there's some nutrition in there,
right?
As well, do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. No, it's not pure trash, but it's not pure literature either. It's some hybrid.
Yeah, which I kind of quite like. I find that strange netherworld between the two a kind of interesting place to investigate, right? Would you read more Figueora based on this book?
Yeah, I'm definitely interested in the Tuareg book, and as I said, it's a series, right? So I'm kind of interested to know where that goes, and then whether it has any kind of ties to this book. Like when they introduced this Malik character, who in some ways is much more interesting than David, our main character.
Yes.
Like he just you're like, oh, this guy, I'd like to read this guy's story, maybe more than I want to read David's story.
Right.
And so, yeah, then I wondered if Tuareg in a way was kind of an attempt to do that more.
Yeah, well, Figueora does seem to have a lot of respect for the Tuareg, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time as well, he doesn't shy away from. There's quite a lot of detail in there about the Tuareg's use of other Africans as slaves as well, right? Like that's what I meant about that. There's no one's kind of held up as exceptional, or without their own history, and I think that's maybe, especially when you're dealing in the African, you have to tread really carefully, right? Because of course, the way that the white Europeans descended upon the continent and dragged thousands of people, of course, into servitude is unforgivable, right? But at the same time, it's when the Europeans did arrive, there was a slave trade already going on, whether it was the Arab slave trade, which I think is even older than the European slave trade, or the intertribal slave trade, right? So not, you don't want to, you're not
whitewashing the whole thing, and but it's not as simple as we would like it to be. Maybe
it wasn't. The nasty Europeans turned up and they were all dancing and having fun, and then we all went, get on them ships, and and we.
Although that is largely what happened.
No, but you know what I mean.
But yes, it wasn't a utopia.
No, I mean, I'm just imagining it. It's really hard to put yourself in a historical mindset, right? But I'm just wondering if you were a 16th century trader and you rocked up to a new land that you'd never been to before, and you saw a race of people like treating each other as slaves and selling. I'm wondering if it would almost be like arriving at like a supermarket or something, and so we can buy some of this food as well, right? It's like the stuff that you're buying and trading. The analogy is getting stretched here, but you know what I mean. It's very tempting to overplay the historic guilt about it, or to think of it out of context.
Right. I guess
I sense you're disagreeing with me here.
My issues are more, it's maybe the scale. It's the way that the British Empire had, and not just the British Empire, but the other European empires had, of almost corporatizing this, like the massive scale of what was done. I mean, I'm not forgiving, intertribal slavery, and I mean, I'm Irish, right? And in Ireland, it existed in the Celtic times, right? There were slaves.
Right.
And so
the Greeks had slaves, right? Different types.
Yes, yeah. I mean,
had slaves.
Yeah, for sure. There's, as the Romans did as well. But I think that when you come in from the outside, like there's, I mean, I'm not explaining away or kind of saying that the slavery that happens within a culture is fine.
Yeah.
Or but it's easier to kind of dehumanize. It's easier to just blanketly see all people as being like disposable humans, whereas I think you'll be more likely to maybe distinguish a little more carefully if it's within the same culture. And as I said, I think like the
but it's still a form of othering though. Like for instance, the let's take for example the Tuareg domination of other African tribes. It's still exceptionalism that you're.
Oh yeah, certainly.
So
as I said, there's no excuse for it. But I guess, have you seen Taboo, the TV series with
Tom Hardy?
What's his face? Tom Hardy, yeah.
No.
Okay. It's interesting because it's all about the kind of the Dutch East India Company and how they were in many ways the first multinational corporation, you know, and how they had their fingers in all kinds of different sketchy pies around the world. And one of them is the slave trade. And there's quite an intense scene, which is in a way, I think in this book is also kind of reflected. In fact, I wonder if this character of Alec Collingwood, and they kind of call back to his great grandfather, who had pretty much drowned a bunch of slaves rather than.
Actually, I've just realized I have actually watched that series, and yes, now that you mention it, the character Tom Hardy plays has a lot in common with this Alec Collingwood character, right? That they're trying to pay back a debt or something, or.
Yes, and this idea, and so in that TV series, there is a scene of a bunch of slaves basically being just dumped into the sea and let drown.
Right.
And
it was
that's grim.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's the absolute, you know, dismissal of human life, you know, as having any value other than monetary value. And at this moment, well, it's no longer valuable for me, so I'm just going to kill these people.
I think, and I know why. I understand exactly what you're saying, and also I understand that it is territory that you want to tread very carefully in as well, because you know, well, I mean, for the obvious reasons, right? But at the same time, and you have to be careful, because when you, for instance, mentioned the thing about the intertribal slavery and stuff like that. And the thing is, no one knows who I am, right? So obviously, I know I'm approaching that from the point of view of, I just think that nuances are important to know about, just so we don't repeat this stuff in a way, like hard truths, no matter how difficult they are to digest. Probably better than half truths, but I am fully aware.
I'm going to go out and say this controversial idea: all slavery is wrong. Regardless of whether it's within your own community or tribe or culture, or from without, or like, why don't we just say that all human life has value and dignity, and that we shouldn't enslave anybody, regardless of whether they're our relatives or whether they look different.
But again, though, that's just from the historical point of view. I think the details are important, just, because it is an insidious thing that can slowly encroach rather than.
Yes, I mean,
you slowly start to dehumanize someone, and before you know it, they've become this thing that you can trade away. And the point I wanted to make was, I know, because no one knows who I am, so it's very suspicious. The language that I'm using is also the language that can be hijacked by people who do want to make excuses.
For apologists.
Exactly. Right, okay. So when I say stuff about intertribal, I get it. There's other people out there who also make those points, but they have an agenda.
Right. Yes.
But I refuse to let other people's kind of insidious agenda making. I'm not going to tread carefully just because I don't want to be mistaken for an asshole, because I think sometimes that's the wrong way to go, right? You
yes, history is history, right? And there are, to some degree, who gets to write it down is still a question.
Well, absolutely.
But I mean, I think so. Noam Chomsky wrote something that kind of really struck me. I can't remember which book it's in, but basically he was being asked about issues connected to slavery and issues connected to the kind of the dehumanization of one group, by another. And he was saying, obviously, the more different a culture is, or the more different people look than you, the easier it is to kind of put them in that other category and be like, okay, and then to tell yourself those stories, you need to tell yourself like, oh, well, they are uncivilized, they're savages, they're not deserving of the same rights and privileges that we are because we are better than them. And he said, the reason you need to do this is because if you don't believe that, if you don't convince yourself and tell yourself these stories, you suffer from such severe cognitive dissonance because that if they are really the same as you, then you're a bad person.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you are selling them, whatever you're doing to these people that is not right. But he said where it's most fascinating is when, to an outsider, the two groups of people would look no different. And he said, he had used the example of the English and the Irish. He said, to somebody from the south of Asia, if you put an Englishman and an Irishman next to each other and ask them like which one's Irish, they're going to have no idea. And yet,
or they say, check a Scotsman in there and you've got a joke.
Exactly. And yet all of those same stereotypes, all the same stories, all of that same language is used, all of those cartoons of the Irish as apes, as, I mean, it's all the same language used to describe whether they're people in India or people in, like, the colonial mindset. They were all scum, and maybe with slight gradations, but basically the same process was enacted on. So what you're saying about, like, intertribal slavery within Africa, but there's intertribal slavery within Europe, right?
Yeah.
And so,
well, I think
it's about power, right? It's about power.
And the thing,
exploitation.
The thing that interests me about it as well is these subtle details which are complicate the easy to understand narrative. And I understand sometimes you do need a simple narrative to drive home a very important point about something terrible that happened before you get caught up in the details. But maybe I have a pessimistic view of humanity, but I don't think we're exempt. Like, for instance, I think one of the problems I have nowadays with modern cancel culture, for example, is it doesn't factor in the possibility that you could also be a racist or sexist or objectionable human without even knowing it. So even the concept of racism, and not racism, maybe I suppose xenophobia or fear, I mean, that's not an entirely invalid response, right? If you're in a certain situation, or you're, or depending on who you are or where you are, it's not always absolutely unacceptable to fear someone who might be slightly different than you in a certain situation. You froze there, it's okay, but
yeah, so I think I missed a big chunk of what you said.
Sorry. Yeah. No, I was just going to say there's nothing inherently wrong about basically fearing someone other than you, right? Like, if you get deep down to it, just on a basic I don't know, biological kind of level, if you're in I'm not going into I'm not going into phrenology. I'm just saying,
I get what you mean.
Yeah, if you're in a point of view, if you're in a place where you're suddenly other and you're in a minority and there's a lot of people around you who look different, and you're suddenly thrust into this and you don't know how it works, there's a certain biological imperative to being slightly suspicious, right? And that's just ingrained. So there's nothing wrong.
Your lizard brain.
Yeah, so there's nothing wrong. there's nothing wrong. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with having that impetus. It's how you deal with it. It's what you do next. It's what you, it's how you act, right? But so I fear that the problem with modern cancel culture, for example, sometimes is it's penalizing those very primal thoughts that you might have, whether they be xenophobic or in some way, or in some way triggered by your reaction to someone of another gender or whatever it is. It seems like you can only police so far, right? And at a certain point, you can't police any further because you're getting into the neurological mind map, right? And who can police that, right? Do you know what I mean? And again, I know I'm using the language that apologists use, and that's what's but does that mean you shouldn't discuss this? Does that mean you shouldn't discuss it? Rather you be branded
No, but I can't say that like a lot of the time that people are kind of pilloried, that there's not a part of me that's like, yeah, screw you. Like, I mean, there's the occasional case where I'm like, yeah, okay, that seems like that person's words were taken out of context, or that situation is probably more nuanced than it's being presented. But a lot of the time, when whether they're racists or homophobes or sexists or whatever else they may, religious bigots or whatever, are raked over the coals in public, I can't say that I shed too many tears that I'm that concerned. It's not that hard to not be a prick. It's not that hard to treat people with respect. 90%
and 90% of the time, I would agree they get what they deserve. But I'm wondering if sometimes it's not for the right reason. Like people will pile on, and they don't actually think about. And I think that's problematic, because that means they're not actually addressing what the problem is. It's they don't really understand they don't really understand why that's problematic. Like the Harvey Weinstein case, right? I'm certainly not gonna defend Weinstein.
Good.
But what I would say is the things that case brings up.
This sentence is fantastic. I'm not going to defend Harvey Weinstein, ... But
the things, but that's what I mean. That's the problem is, and I understand making a joke out of it, but the fact is it's almost like nervous laughter. You're making that joke, just because it does. Oh, hang on now. And you're thinking, well, you shouldn't necessarily have to do that, because the things that he did, for example, and the ways he did them, and the fact that he could get away with it for so long, that's the fascinating stuff. And if you just go, he's like, I'll give you an example, right? I'll give you an example of that case, right? So, whole bunch of horrible stuff that Harvey Weinstein did, the way he went about it, the coercion, etc., right? However, the number of times in the reporting about him, I've heard people say, he's gross and fat. Like,
yes, well, that's got nothing to do with it.
No, exactly. And you're thinking, but it's become acceptable to just chuck that in there, like. And you're thinking, oh no, hang on now. You've kind of, that's got nothing. It's nothing to do with that. It shouldn't matter whether he's gross and fat. I mean, you've almost. Do you know what I mean? You're
undermining your own argument by stereotyping in another way.
Exactly.
And, by fat shaming. Exactly. So that's exactly. Agreed.
And that might seem like a small thing, but I don't think it is, because if someone's talking like that, they clearly don't get it, right? If they're not
agreed.
Yeah. So that's what I mean.
That's just a different kind of discrimination.
But whatever the cause, it's just it strikes me that sometimes people should they should think more about the things they have problems. Fuck, this has gone way off.
We strayed quite far away from the novel at hand.
Sorry, I might have to edit some of this.
For example,
not so problematic.
The sentence.
Just for brevity's sake.
Right. But I guess to bring us back to this, there's a lot of stories you could tell. There's a lot of stories you could tell about the slave trade, right? Yeah. And one of my, I haven't seen it in many years, and I'd like to watch it again. One of my favorite movies that kind of touches on some of this stuff is
one of my favorite slave films.
Yes, is Queimada, right? Which is stars Marlon Brando as William Walker. It's the other movie about William Walker, right? And it's written by the guy who wrote a bunch of my favorite spaghetti westerns, a bunch of the kind of the very political kind of like the Big Gun Down and all the ones that have these kind of Mexican, heroes pitted against a kind of a CIA type of American. So things like A Bullet for the General, right? And Salinas, I think, was the name of the guy who wrote a bunch of these, and he wrote
Burn.
Yes, yeah, the burn. Yeah, so Queimada is the Spanish word for burn, I think, but yes, burn.
Right.
And the hero is a Afro-Caribbean guy. So to me, if you're gonna make a movie about the slave trade, I kind of like it to have a main character maybe is black. And I realize that Nadia is black, but she's kind of the damsel in distress.
Right.
Yes. She's being rescued by her white husband, who's a bit of a crap sack
of agency, right? She does try and escape.
Yes.
Herself.
Yes. She's not a total. No, for sure. No, she's tough, but it's still kind of like, and I guess she's one of the two main point of view characters, so it's not like she's denied a point of view. Yeah.
And I think there is,
the movie in some ways is more problematic in that way.
Yes, I know exactly what you're saying about, but again, I think this is one of these things that has become a little bit easy to, it's easy to criticize but forgetting there was a reason that this narrative device is used sometimes, right? And that is, I suppose, that you want a character like an outsider so that they learn about. It's an easy way to write exposition in, right? Because if you have a black character, for example, who's very familiar with what's going on, then you have to write the dialogue in a way that can be clunky and awkward, right? Whereas if you have a character as your viewpoint character and they're seeing everything, then there's a good excuse for people to explain to them, well, these are the such and such people.
Right.
I'm taking on board exactly what you're saying. But again, I think there are probably reasons that they used that narrative device of having the white European outsider. And nowadays, obviously, we found ways around that. Obviously, we've moved on, and that's a good thing. But again, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think there was probably a reason they did things this way for a long time. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, or maybe it's just more comfortable for white people to read about white people in that way of like.
Maybe, but again,
it's because you could identify in some way, in a way that's easier maybe.
Well, I suppose there's.
And when they were making the movie, it was going to be we can get Michael Caine.
I suppose there's two ways you can argue that as well, right? So on the one hand, you could argue, white people need other white people to feel
identified with.
Yeah. But on the other hand, you could say, well, you can either write a white character who is realistic because you're writing from that point of view, or you could construct a black character who you don't. I think you've frozen again, have you?
Yeah. Just for a sec.
Yeah. So you can do that and at least you know what you're talking about. Or you could try and be noble and say, no, 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 I will write this from a black character's point of view.
Oh yeah, no,
but
that's
you don't know what the
plenty
fuck you're
problematic
talking
too.
about. So
Yeah, oh no, absolutely, yes. And but it's funny, like I do have a soft spot for kind of, you know, like of all the Quentin Tarantino movies, I quite like his version of Django, for that reason that it is just like so broadly painted. It's so, you know, I enjoy a good, like, yeah, you know, have you ever seen, what's the movie? Her name is Lizzie Borden. Working Girls, maybe it's called.
no, I haven't.
Okay, that's a movie that, and to some degree, actually, that is a Catherine Breillat, or however you say her name. Her movie Romance would be another one. There's movies that can, like, I realize, like, this movie is not made for me. Like, I am almost displaced out of myself as a man, as a white male, because they're like, holy crap. Like, by the end of both of those movies, but especially Working Girls, like, I was just like, it othered male sexuality. Yeah. And that was exciting to me because like how
I think Nick disappeared. Oh, yeah, you disappeared.
Oh, you're back again.
Yeah,
yeah, we're losing it more frequently, unfortunately. But I think, you know, and it's the same to some degree, like when I'm watching like a movie made in the 70s in Japan, right, and some terrible white actor suddenly shows up, and I'm like, oh wow, you know, like, right,
yeah.
And it was that experience in Japan. I would sometimes, in a way, forget that I was so other until I would walk past, like, actually the best example of this is I went to see Andrew WK, my rock star pal, play at the Apple shop in Shibuya. Right. And I went there, and I'm in the crowd, and everyone's kind of jumping up and down in the shop, and there's quite a few people in there. He comes out on stage and he's like, hey Nick, and he points right at me, and I'm like, oh hey Andrew. And later on I said to him, like, well, like, how did you, like, there were so many people there, how did you spot me?
Right.
And I then later saw a photograph of that crowd, and I was like, oh yeah, that's how, because I stuck out like a sore thumb, because I'm completely other in this, you know, crowd. And, you know, it would reach a point where sometimes I would be walking along the street and I would catch sight of myself in like a reflective surface and be surprised by my reflection.
Yeah.
You know,
it's informative, right? It's and bringing it back to your point about, I haven't seen Working Girls, but now actually I'd never, now that you mentioned that, I'm quite keen to see it. The idea of, you know, you being seeing yourself in a totally different context and seeing yourself, and it is something, yeah, it is invigorating, right? And it's exciting, and you do have to wonder sometimes that some people seem really uncomfortable, like they can't even handle that for like a day or a couple of hours while watching a film or something.
Yeah.
And you do have to wonder how, I don't know, what kind of level of insecurity that they're working on, that they, you know, they can't even just imagine just for a little while that, you know, you're not the center of the universe.
Yes. Right? Yeah.
Which is why I'm very aware of being careful about saying certain things, because I could, if someone doesn't know who I am, for example, you know who I am, so
yes.
But if someone doesn't know who I am, I would be very, you don't know, well, is he in that camp, or is he, you know,
right?
And the look isn't selling it either, right? so I'm fully aware.
At least you're not wearing braces.
Right. Yeah, they're in the cleaners. Yeah. So anyway, we've strayed all over the place. I'm gonna try and make a sense in the edit out of this. So before we do, well, we have another couple of bits of business to get to. Is there anything in particular you haven't said about Ebano that you wanted to?
Well, I think I was laughing when when I realized that about a third of the way through the book that it was not what I thought you had sent to me to read, right? That this was not going to be a, you know, necessarily a literary treatment of a serious topic, but more of a kind of slightly exploitative action themed, version. I then found out that it had been made into a movie, right? Ashanti, not that long after it would have been published, I'm sure, in English. And then, so I started to read about, and I was just looking through the film list of like, that other books of his that had been adapted. And I saw Enzo G. Castellari's name. I was like, well, hang on, Enzo G. Castellari. And then I saw Monty Hellman's name. And I was like, well, wait a second. Like, who is I was like, who is this guy? And like, these are not names again I would associate. These are not kind of, they're great. I like all of their films, but they're not necessarily people. It's not that Gabriel Garcia Marquez level of culture. It's a slightly more,
It's interesting how often he has been adapted, actually, for the screen. Do you remember that Brian Yuzna film, Rottweiler?
Yes, that's one of his too. And apparently there's an earlier Spanish version of that as well.
There is, yeah. And obviously, no spoilers, just in case you haven't seen it. Not that it's a great film or anything, but the big reveal at the end of that is unique to the Yuzna. I don't think it's in the original, but I don't think the original book has science fiction tinges, let's say.
Okay.
There's a Sergio Garoni movie called Last Harem.
These names that came up when I looked up the film, I was like, well, that really sold me on the idea that maybe this was just pure trash, because names like Garone and Castellari and Yuzna don't speak to that Oscar-winning.
Monty Hellman, I mean, he makes kind of more thoughtful films than full-on trash films, right? I use this beard again. This is going to be fun to edit.